and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Fransson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksip, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode, What is Truth? With Joseph Atman.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Created in the Image of God, the role of religion in society. I'm your host, Wade Fransson. This is a show that I've very much looked forward to doing. This question, what is truth, is one that has sort of wanted me to scratch an itch for decades. This is a quote from Jesus at the trial, the pre-trial for his crucifixion with Pontius Pilate, when he was served up by the Jewish people as an insurrectionist who was making himself a king. That was the accusation against him. And he was explaining or responding to Pilate's questions, one of which was he a king or not? And Jesus didn't really answer that. He said, "You say I'm a king." But in that context, he said, "Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." And Pilate's answer was to say, "What is truth?" And then he went out and told the people that he found no sin. He found nothing wrong with Jesus, and was willing to acquit him if the Jewish leaders had gone along with that, which of course they didn't, and the rest is history. But that question, what is truth, was never really answered. And of course, as a lifelong seeker, it's an important question. It's an interesting question. And I have had the benefit of doing this show now for well over a year and gotten to know a couple of philosopher friends. So, who better to pose that question to and discuss that with you, my dear audience, tonight on Created in the Image of God? So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our well known co host, sometimes co host and guest tonight, Dan Sanderson. Welcome, Dan. He was already announced or pre-announced on the little show trailer. And our more recent friend who's been on the show before, Joe Atman. Welcome to the studio, Joe.
Thank you for having me again, Wade.
And Joe, as some of you may recall, is the author of a book called A Philosophical War, a book that I continue to reflect on because of its deep insight into one interpretation of the Garden of Eden story, in which we are challenged in our understanding of reality because of the concepts that we create in order to understand reality. And Joe, that might be a nice way to sort of introduce this topic for you to unpack that idea from your book. And I know you spend a whole book talking about it, so I'm putting you on the spot to try to briefly explain it, but I invite you to do so to sort of tee up this whole discussion.
Sure. The basic tenet or concept, if you'll allow the pun, is that we more or less understand the world through a series of concepts. And yet, ironically, concepts are different, ideas are different than realities, basically. Our thought about a school bus is not the same as the reality of a school bus. And then you say, well, what makes up a reality per se? And I think we're going to get pretty deeply into that here this evening. But more or less, from a biblical standpoint, we were given this kind of consciousness that we have that is largely composed of concepts. We interpret and put our consciousness together largely through the utility of idea, of concept, of some sort of distance from, an abstraction about. And yet I think that that was something that was difficult for the biblical Old Testament version of God, in that normally, most other creatures, most other beings don't have this disconnect with the world and with experience, with phenomena, largely because of the fact that they don't conceptualize things. Cats don't sit around and wondering, what is it to be a cat and what is this life all about? They are simply they're simply at one with their experience. where because of the way that we've structured our consciousness, we're always at odds with the world. We're always in this sort of perpetual state of a removal from, rather than a being with truth, a being with reality, a being with ourselves. And that is, in my opinion, the basis for why we suffer, for why we struggle, for why it is that we are at this continual odds with everything. And I think, again, that's why the biblical God didn't want us to eat from that tree, because of the fact that that kind of knowledge without an experience, and that sort of existence without fully understanding the ramifications of it, is a very dangerous one to have. And so we were cast out from that garden, whether we were cast out by God itself or by our actual comprehension of this knowledge that we weren't ready for, is up for some debate. But that in it, the smallest of nutshells is sort of where it's at.
Perfect. And let me unpack a few of those things, and Dan, we'll get to you in a minute, especially the really wonderful question that you asked while we were in the studio right before this show launched. But let me address a couple of the things that you mentioned, especially because, as you know, and as the audience knows, I'm a recovering fundamentalist who still tends to like to take the Bible literally. So let's look at it two ways now. Let's look at the Garden of Eden story two ways. First, I'm going to take a literal view and pose a few questions, right? So if we accept the story as being literally true, and God created Adam from the dust, the story shows that Adam was a grown man. There's no, there's no sort of narration of Adam as a Mowgli, right? Who was a boy in the Garden of Eden running around with Bagheera and Baloo, right? No, he was a grown man. And he invited this new man, God invited this new man to name all the animals, right? Um, well, where did he get the language from? Where did he get the concepts from to sort of describe these animals and give them a name that might have some kind of meaning? Why would God give him that task right there? And how would he know how to dress and keep the garden if in fact he was created from dust as an adult? You follow me? So right there, the story kind of breaks down if you take it too literally. So I'm going to now shift, and I'm not saying there wasn't a literal garden and there wasn't a literal Adam. I actually believe there was a literal Adam, but at if we even accept that, the story is a really condensed version of the full story, right? Some details have been left out, one might say, at a minimum. But now let's take the other tack and say that there's an evolutionary process going on, and Adam is symbolic of man's emergence as a being who has the capacity to now begin to process these concepts. And Eve is introduced as sort of his soul, which is a Baha'i sort of interpretation, one interpretation. I'm not saying the interpretation. But Eve is kind of a soul-like creature who is now elevating man's consciousness, right? By introducing or being the first one to say, you know what, I would like to go there. It might be just fine to be an animal and not have to worry about good and evil. But I have a desire for that fruit because it says it is desired to make one wise. This was Eve's statement, right? She looked at the fruit and she wanted it. She says, yes, I would like that power. I would like the power to discern between good and evil. But now in Buddhism, desire is the source of all human suffering, right? So what I'm getting at here, Joe, is asking you to sort of further unpack this conundrum of we would want to and we would need to grow to be able to discern good and evil, to fulfill our human potential, to not remain an animal, to evolve beyond the simplistic animal life in which you could kill with no recourse because you're hungry and you could just eat whatever you kill and it doesn't matter, right? And you don't have greed involved because you're not going to kill 10 animals when you only need to eat one. That's more of a human tendency, right? But create a human and don't give it a sense of good and evil, and that's what you get. You get, wanton destruction, right? So that's the conundrum, right? And you've kind of, to me, really crystallized this out with this idea and this challenge that by creating a concept, we might be enabling ourselves to climb to a higher level of awareness and understanding in a way, but we also cast ourselves out of the garden because we've created a false idol, which brings, disappointment, all the negative things, guilt, whatever. Anyway, I'll stop there and let you respond to all that.
Well, I think the response is that you've hit the nail on the head, because you do, I think, need that. I mean, the passage, depending on the text that you read, that predates the happening with the actual consumption of that fruit from the trees. God, in a very mysterious passage, says, "Let them not eat from the tree, lest they be like us."
Right.
Right. And so it's like, okay, well, wouldn't a God want its creation to, at least an all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful one, who wants to share that, right? Wouldn't that God want its creation to have a piece of that? Then again,
well, unless, and sorry to interrupt, just really briefly, unless like an overprotective mother, there's a lot of pain associated with that, right? You don't want to see your child experience that pain. So, an overprotective God would say, "No, let's not go there, because look at what's going to happen if we allow that to happen." And indeed, look at what has happened. What have humans done with that power?
Yeah, I think I would argue that the pain could have been lessened had we sort of stayed in that state, for sure. Then again, the pain could be further lessened still, and maybe this is all part of the great plan, because as you correctly stated, as I was starting to state a moment ago, you can't really evolve, you can't really get to your highest potential without this kind of knowledge and experience.
No pain, no gain. I've heard it said, no pain, no gain.
For sure. No, without this kind of knowledge, how could you possibly become, your fullest? There would be a whole blind side to reality without this kind of knowledge. The problem that we encounter is that we have touches and feels of it without, a full understanding of what it is, what it means. Our experience is limited. And yet our knowledge, the potential for it, seems unlimited, right? We learn things all the time. We grow in new ways all the time. And yet we don't seem to have a large enough cup to hold all of that knowledge. So again, I think that the large problem, at least if we're looking at this from a biblical standpoint, is that we gained, or humanity, or Adam and Eve, whether you believe it evangelically true or just a beautiful metaphor, I would even make an argument that it is a very powerful, maybe even more powerful as a metaphor, but that's a different conversation. But I think the difficulty is that if you have all this knowledge without experience, that's where you really, really start to encounter difficulties. And again, the way that we've set up our consciousness, we have a whole system by which we interpret abstractions and create realities from those abstractions within ourselves, and then operate as if those abstractions were real. I have an image about Dan that I operate on, thinking that, it could be totally right. I could think, Dan's a terrible person, and maybe he did, something, harmful to me. When actually it was you, Wade, who did this harmful thing. And I've treated Dan like, the enemy this whole time, when really all along was you. I had an idea about something.
I put him up to it.
I'm sure you would have. But that's really kind of where it lives and breathes, is we take these ideas and without experience and without full knowledge, and treat it as though we did have full knowledge, and then operate in the world as if those things were the truth, which is, I know, what we're talking about today. That's where that danger really, really lies.
Well, and this is where I want to introduce Dan's question from earlier, because we were talking about what is truth and discussing how the show would go. And, you know, I'm certainly trained more in the Western way of thinking, and I've been a seeker, and I've been called by interviewers in the past, have reviewed my books, in being in relentless pursuit of the truth my whole life. And there really has been a driven quality for me to understand the underlying reality of things, but I've approached it intellectually. And then Dan introduced the question, well, what do Eastern philosophers think about it? And we read this little quote that overall Eastern, this is the beauty of Western artificial intelligence, produced this summary, right? Overall, Eastern philosophers often view truth as interconnected with ethical living. And we would certainly see that in the Bible and other religious texts, but it goes a little bit further to say, because especially when you start thinking about theologians, right, and how the Catholic Church and other religion in the West has evolved, interconnected with ethical living, spiritual realization, and harmonious relationships with the world. The emphasis is often on direct experience, introspection, and living in accordance with universal principles rather than abstract speculation or intellectual analysis. And in the West, we've gone more into that abstract speculation and intellectual analysis and data-driven analysis, in which data points represent some kind of objectivity, which often then overpowers and negates somebody's direct personal experience, in which you're told, well, you must have fooled yourself into thinking that because statistically that can't be true. So Dan, you are the one that raised that question. What are your thoughts sort of on this discussion? And I know you don't come at the issue of truth from a biblical perspective, or certainly from the Garden of Eden, but you've addressed this question differently in your lifelong research and experience.
I do, Wade, actually, and increasingly so, probably because of your influence. And I sit here between the two of you, and Joe dropped in something that says perhaps the metaphor is even stronger. And I'm offer a conciliant position where it's actually you've got the two of these coming together, right? And so we've got Wade saying that this is the literal truth that's in the Bible, and then we have Joe that's saying maybe the metaphor is stronger. And I'm saying that that's actually what the meta is for. Okay.
I see what you did there.
So there's actually an intention for it. So when we start to look at all of this information as a whole, and we look at the Garden of Eden in particular, some of the things that worry us as a civilization are going to be that fall from grace of this perfected state of Eden, right? Okay. And that's worrisome. It's troublesome. It's letting your teenager go, let them experience life. And so we implicitly had this idea of there's going to be highs and there's going to be lows. There's going to be great rewards, but there's also going to be evil in there. And I have to reiterate that when somebody looks at an animal like a bird and they say that defining feature, that essence of that bird is the wings, it flies, the bird flies, right? Okay. This is an example of a bird that flies. It's this defining characteristic. And the defining characteristic of a human, at least from an evolutionary standpoint, is we have this incredible ability to derive truth from abstractions. We have this superpower of abstract capability. And so what I find that can we balance the conversation to say equal parts amazingness and equal parts, and that's this pull between good and evil. So it's not just identifying what is good or identifying what is evil. It's a whole participatory relationship with it and being in that space. And so now we say, it's almost like it's a transcendent plateau of presence where we're actually experiencing an ethical meditation in and amongst we could call it a make-believe world, right? But an imagined shared experience that is over and above the tangible, physical world, right? And so, I mean, that's how I would approach it. It's quite beautiful, actually. It's our superpower, really.
It totally is our superpower. And yet, as with all superpowers or with anyone's strengths, usually it's, your greatest strength is your greatest fault, right? And so how do we use that superpower in a way, for good, right? Always, rather than when, Superman gets turned, into the evil guy, and then, the nemesis uses his powers on the world, for his will. I think that's kind of the whole sort of crux that we're in here, is that we do have this capacity, and yet at the same time, we're not necessarily aware of how powerful we are, how powerful and how important it is to operate in the way that we do, given that we are so frequently abstracting from things. And again, my caution to us is that if we were able to see and understand that how we interpret things, how we go about, our daily interactions are largely based on the abstractions and on concepts that we've built that for at best are incomplete, and at worst are completely misguided and completely false. How do we make sure that we're aware of that, and then yet nevertheless continue to operate?
Well, I think that gives a great introduction to the topic. So we're going to quickly go to a commercial break. We've had a number of great comments from the audience already, but I'd like to encourage more. So we're going to show a quick trailer of your book, Joe, A Philosophical War, and encourage everybody who's listening in to continue to get those comments coming in, because we will be picking one of you over the course of the show to receive a free copy of Joseph's book. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. We'll dive a little bit more closely into the actual words of Jesus, as well as the implications of that question, what is truth? We'll be right back after this.
In a world where the battle of minds goes unnoticed, one man dared to challenge the very structure of consciousness itself. Joseph Atman proudly presents the first part of his groundbreaking collected work, A Philosophical War. Atman's mission is to expose humanity's most elusive adversary, the structure of its own consciousness. He argues that the modern human condition is plagued by a thought process that inflicts unnecessary suffering. This thought process, like a stealthy enemy, wages war against our nature. Atman's quest is both daring and revolutionary, to overthrow and replace the current prevailing conscious structure. He identifies the enemy within and seeks a more coherent and powerful ally. With digestible bursts of epistemological guerrilla strikes, he pierces the lines of everyday thought patterns. This counteroffensive offers a new perspective, one that challenges the way we perceive reality. Atman asserts that humanity's consciousness has relied too heavily on thought alone. He introduces being with, a relationality that harmonizes humanity with the world around us. But the battle doesn't end there. Atman reinterprets the early chapters of Genesis. He calls for the removal of contemporary notions of God while offering a profound argument for God's existence. Filled with intrigue, simplistic insights, and mystical yet realistic hope, this book is a potential landmark work. A Philosophical War by Joseph Atman. Available at Amazon.
And let me just share that, that book was what intrigued me and got me in touch with having Joe on the show. And his reverence for the Garden of Eden story, while using it as metaphor, was very appealing to me personally. And so I wanted to reassure those who are particularly religious in the audience of the value of this book, but also then the idea that explains how and why we were cast out of the garden, right? And these concepts that form idols in our mind that separate us from the true God, from true reality, because we then utilize our own ego and our insistent self to press for our view of things, our concept, over what reality is actually trying to impress upon us if we were open to it. So anyway, those are just my comments, and thank you, Joe. And I would encourage everyone to, comment if you'd like to try to win a copy of that book, or just go out on Amazon to order it. We'll share the QR code here in a little bit. But getting back to this discussion, so let's actually read the brief words of Jesus on this topic. And I had them up a minute ago, and now, of course, I've got to find that quote. Pilate, this is from John chapter 18, verse 37. Pilate said to him, "Are you a king then?" Because this was the accusation that was being brought. Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king." And by the way, I'm reading, I think, from the New King James Version. "For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." So let's just stop there before we get to this question of what is truth. I have come into the world, he said, that I should bear witness to the truth. And it's really fascinating when you view the life of Jesus as recorded to reflect on how did he do that? How did he bear witness to the truth? And ultimately, he sacrificed his life in bearing witness to that truth. And then he left us with this statement: everyone who is of the truth hears my voice, will recognize the truth of my words. So Dan, Joe, any thoughts or comments about that part, what Jesus said in his defense? Not that he had to defend himself or that he was trying to defend himself, but rather in answer to Pilate's questioning.
Go ahead, Joe.
I would say that, it seemed like Jesus said that he was brought into the world to witness truth and then to relay that, right? Something that I think he demonstrated a number of times was not being done by a lot of people who said and claimed that they were religious. And I think you could very easily make the same argument today, is because what is true and real religion? What is it to actually be religious in the truest sense of the word? I think that the argument that Jesus would make, and I think that the argument that any sound philosopher making this point would trend towards, is that you have to get rid of, again, I'm going to be a broken record on this as usual. You have to get rid of your ideas, your own bias, your own, even not necessarily personal experiences, but the things that may hinder you from seeing and experiencing and acting with what is, with reality itself. And again, I think we need to talk about, what is reality? Is there such a thing as objectivity? It's a whole section of philosophy, that's known largely as epistemology. How do we know what we know? But I think to what is it to be really religious? It is to see that truth, and without any judgment, without any capacity for self promotion or for self benefit, to relay what it is that you're interpreting, what it is that you're seeing, and hopefully seeing things as it is. And then reporting that to the world, again, with this unbiased filter. And I think that was largely Jesus's power. He treated, everyone equally. He gave equal chance. But he condemned people where they needed condemning. He got angry at folks where they needed that sort of reprimand. And he really operated, by and large, at least as from the biblical standpoint, from this objective stance, more or less. He operated, he was truth, right? I mean, he was the way.
Yeah. Anything to share or add to that, Dan?
Yeah, I would take it a little bit of a different way. I'm really glad you stopped on that piece with Jesus, because whether you're, look, the thing about Jesus, and this is coming from someone who says, I say I'm a secular believer, take that however you want to take it. But the whole idea of Jesus is that he is the divinity on earth, right? He's God made flesh. Okay? And so those words in the Bible about people hear my voice, yeah, they do, in a kingdom of knowing what is right and wrong. So Immanuel Kant talks about this as a prior to the senses. This falls right into your idea here of almost an idealized sense of just being in the world, Joe, is that Immanuel Kant makes the point that this is prior to experiences. We have an innate ability to know right from wrong. And so I feel the beauty, the hair stands up on the back of my neck when I hear Jesus proclaiming that if people listen to me, they hear my voice, right? And so this goes for faithful, this goes for Roman, this goes for, right? This is that introspective guilt that if you know you're doing something wrong, you know it, you hear my voice, right? That's the key. And so he acknowledges that he is, in a way, he kind of, I don't know if he's really, or to what extent he's acknowledging that he is the king. It seems like he kind of skirts that a little bit because he doesn't want to offend the earthly realm. But he says, more importantly than anything, this is inside those who hear that, they hear my voice, they hear the truth. So if you focus on that, that's what he's trying to describe, is that inner voice that's inside every one of us. And
Thanks.
then the problem is you have Pilate then, in sort of trying to resolve this, is going, well, what is truth? And there's kind of some different flavors to it, because is he trying to just appease his wife and his political career, and is he trying to, like, you basically convey the whole beauty of knowing what is right and wrong, because he's like, so you're participating in a relativist obscurity that takes away from the beauty of that grace, right? Of this, like, innate knowing of what is right and wrong.
So we'll get to that in 1 second. I want to just thank you though for that beautiful explanation. I want to go back, Joe, and when you mentioned about Jesus bearing witness to the truth, and this idea of being, two stories came to mind. One is the story of Mary and Martha, right? Because Mary sat at Jesus' feet and just was drinking in his words. And Martha was running around overly concerned with serving him and making sure that everybody else was happy. And in this particular circumstance, not to put Martha down, he was praising Mary for choosing the better thing, for really being with him and just drinking in his words at a deep level. Another one is doubting Thomas, right? Where blessed are those who, not having seen, believed. And you needed to actually put your finger through, the hole. So come over here, put your finger through the hole in my hand. There, now you have it, right? I'm reminded of the scientist who studies an animal by killing it and dissecting it, right? Which is kind of like, what we do with some of our concepts. We're brutally judging a matter that we really don't understand. And I've heard people refer to Jesus as, not to take this in the wrong way, but what he did was coming to earth as a human, like becoming a rabbit being chased by the fox, so he could know what that was like, so that he could have empathy with all the rabbits. So anyway, that sort of direct experiential learning So now let's get to Pilate's words. And would it be fair to say that, I mean, you could interpret what he said in a number of different ways, but he's most famous for being the guy who washed his hands of it, right? He
Mhm.
washed his hands of the whole affair. And his question, what is truth? Isn't that kind of an agnostic's statement and an agnostic's pride, just being able to wash one's hands of it and pretend to be objective? But Pilate is admitting here, well, I don't hear it. I don't find anything wrong with you, but I also don't believe in you. And so I'm just going to toss you back into the global mosh pit. And well, gee, that didn't work out too well for you, but I'm washing my hands of it.
Yeah. First, I think what Dan said was brilliant about that a priori, what it's called a priori knowledge, that knowledge of without, that knowledge before. Because as we are now getting into this conversation about what truth actually is, there does seem to be some inner moral compass, within us all. And that seems to go for most all beings. I mean, we said it earlier, an animal doesn't kill 10 different animals because it's hungry. A predator will kill, just what it needs to survive. That's a mechanism that we might look at as something that's vicious and difficult for us to kind of comprehend. But that's just the law of the land out there. But it doesn't do more than is necessary for its own survival per se. And so good and what is right and wrong, that doesn't really even that plays into things, but it's on a very different level depending on the kind of creature you're dealing with or the kind of consciousness that you have, I think. But there does seem to be some sense of how to act, how to behave just generally within the world. Is that truth? Is that a nod to reality or to this way of being, again, just with the way itself? I think
Well,
I think you have I just think you have to unpack what truth is, and then beyond that, what is reality and what is objective, if any of those things actually can be said to exist.
well, the beauty of this kind of discussion, I mean, and I wanted to have this show for very selfish reasons. I knew I would learn from this discussion. And so I want to share an epiphany. It's sort of a slight deepening of understanding that I've had, but all this talk about direct a priori knowledge, right? The direct experiential knowledge. If you take that back to the Garden of Eden, once we ate of that fruit, we cannot, I mean, it says in the day you eat of it, you will die. Why? Because you are now subject to the law and its penalties. You don't get to say, I didn't know. You don't get to say that anymore because that awareness is available to you. This is what you're talking about. There's some innate sense, some conscience. Paul the apostle talks about having their consciousness seared with a hot iron, right? So we can destroy our conscience, but that's on us, right? It's ultimately on us. We have direct access. And even when Jesus was crucified, even more so when the veil was ripped in the temple, right? Whatever concepts and whatever high priests were in place that actually kept us, those high priests that tried to point us towards God, but it was towards their concept of God, so they were actually making it more difficult for us to experience God. That was
Bingo.
ripped. The Baha'i faith teaches that the priesthood was abolished, but I often say, well, yeah, it was. Jesus abolished it when through his crucifixion, the veil in the temple was ripped asunder and you had free direct access to God. And you always had it in the Garden of Eden, but we cast ourselves out through these concepts that we built, right? So we don't get to wash our hands of it. We can't. What is truth? Well, you should know the truth. And Jesus says, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. We have access to it, and we can't say we didn't know. That's not going to, when we get called into the judgment in whatever form it takes, we're not going to be able to say, well, gee, I didn't know. Nobody ever shared that with me. Well, no, I shared it with you when I created you in my image and gave you the ability to discern good and evil.
Yeah, and now we're talking about also morality and ethics, which is a even maybe a different conversation itself. I mean, it all has to do with truth, right? It all, and again, we haven't really talked about what truth actually potentially is. But if we're trying to discern what is right and what is wrong, is that the same thing as truth? That's something to unpack, I think.
It's interesting you bring up the word truth, and I kind of compare it to true with its binomial counterpart of false, and then you're into this realm of I guess like scientific inquiry. It's true or it's false. True and truth have a slight difference to it too, right? It has more of a feeling of ubiquity, like truth, right? Like it's like almost everywhere. The truth. Well, what is the truth? So that's a little different than saying, we set up an experiment and we could see that inductively this was true and this was false, right? That's different. There's a difference there.
That's a really interesting point, Dan. Because I think what you're saying is right. Truth is much more like universal, right? Where something can be true in a situation, right? But where we're talking about like truth, like something ultimate, and that's the end of the line. And you mentioned, Dan, that you when we did the promo for the show, that truth is something that you really struggle with. And I thought, well, yeah, don't we all, right? Like that was a very honest admission. But so much of philosophy has orbited around this happening of trying to find out what it is. And if we could start from this place, this very humble place of admission of, I don't know, I think we'd all be much better off. But I also think it's a great sort of very subtle observation, but a very important one of the difference between truth and what's true. Right.
I think it can be easily hijacked by people of the cloth, right? I think that truth and dogma, I think dogma can be very easily hijacked and put into the garbs of truth.
Well, let me put it.
Your own framework. I'm sorry, Wade.
Go ahead.
When you create your own framework, when you set up your own rules, there can, like within, a religion or within a particular mode of thinking, you can say there are a number of different, things that are true within those parameters, and then call, that grand happening, its own truth, right? But it's easy to do when you set up the rules yourself. But this is exactly what Wade was saying about, the religions of the past, is that they've taken their concept and idea of what is truth, which is, I think, what a religion attempts to expound and get at is what is this connection between humanity and ultimate truth and ultimate God. Because I think most of the time we think about God as the truth, as something ultimate and paramount like that. But when we have concepts about what that is, when we frame it in a certain way, we're limiting it, but then it's much easier to control those what is true, rather than, and we're not looking at truth itself anymore. Sorry, that was a little longer of a tangent.
Well, no, so I'd like to just share my own perspective, and this goes back to many decades ago now, but most people here know that I was ordained into the ministry. And it was with a particular very large religious movement. When I say very large, compared to what? Well, not compared to the Catholic Church or the Protestant movement, but a modern growing religious movement in which we believed that God had to open your mind, right? You might say, again, to refer to some Baha'i language, because I'm a Baha'i and we stream this to the Baha'i channel. There are veils. We have veils that keep us from perceiving the truth. Joe, you referred to them as constructs, right, or concepts. And with Plato, it was a cave that we sat in behind, and we only saw, reflection at the front of the cave. We didn't really know the truth. But we believed that God had to sort of remove some of those veils for you to get to the point where you could begin to see things that you had not previously seen that are in the Bible. And this was incredibly useful. I mean, it opened my eyes to study and understand the Bible in a new and different way. And it did free me up from a number of concepts which are clearly wrong. However, what really bothered me is that it didn't take me long to realize, especially after I was a minister, that we believed you had to have your mind opened by God. But then we were very good at teaching you to close it again once you had accepted this much, right? And then we had all these ways that were basically fear-based to keep you from growing beyond that, to keep you stuck in this arrested spiritual development where you'd receive certain things and they were very valuable. They were incredibly valuable to me. They helped, I don't want to denigrate them in any way. And yet they were incredibly limiting. And then when I was a minister, I was frustrated with the fact that the people in my congregation were stuck in the dogma. And I ultimately saw no way out of this. And I saw the whole global movement then begin to be more coercive to both try to keep people where they were at, and other people were trying to force people to move in a certain direction that they believed to be more correct. And ultimately, these concepts were reinforced and kept in place with the threat that Satan would deceive you and take you away from the truth, right? So this is actually, in a microcosm, the case with every religion. When Jesus brought his teachings, initially there's a flourishing of newness, of springtime, of openness, of people learning new things. And this is what it means that they hear my voice, and Mary sitting at his feet and drinking in of him. But over time, then, as these doctrines become dogma and they become calcified, they then stifle growth and stifle evolution. And then something needs to come and reignite that and bust through, like Luther coming later is one example, and busting it open. But more importantly, you have this succession of prophets and messengers sent by God who open people up to new understanding. That's at least religion as I see it, and why I don't view religion ultimately as a negative thing, but it has a springtime and it has a fall and it has a winter. And then we're just stuck, and we need some additional input from a higher source to help us rip open those veils again and bust those concepts up.
And would you say then that is something that has to be downloaded onto us? Is that accessible through our own faculties? Is that something that we're able to grasp, in any
Well, yes.
way?
Think about it this way. Despite all these challenges with concepts, you still have to go to school. You still have to read. Somebody has to help you understand how to read. Now, could we say, no, that forget it? And this is a discussion you and I have had, right? We need concepts. We need to conceptualize things to go forward. But then we have to get rid of the training wheels and ride the bike.
Yes.
So you need a teacher, you need a school, you need parents. When we're not like Bambi, we can't walk after 2 minutes of being born. We will literally die if we don't have somebody caring for us and speaking to us so that we can listen and learn the language. I mean, take Helen Keller, for example, right? Until she had her teacher. Everybody knows the story of Helen Keller. and the fact that she was like a wild girl, and she was like becoming frustrated and enraged as a young child until somebody could reach her and then teach her. So what we do on this show, we try to reach people. I try to reach people so that to create an environment where it's conducive to learn. Is there some teaching that goes on? Perhaps, but it's more at the collegiate level where we're having discussions and people are learning by being exposed to these ideas and these concepts. But without that, where are we?
I'd also wonder if we're able to access this, and maybe this was my previous question, or should have more succinctly been the previous question. Can we access that on our own without, or what would access on our own?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Right? We can absolutely access it on our own. But it's also a very frustrating dead-end experience, right? So getting back to the Garden of Eden, right? And that initial thing about, well, we don't want them, and we want to keep them from eating of that tree because it would be much better for you just to listen to us and let us teach you, right? So drink of the tree of life and be with us and we will teach you. But no, we had to go off and learn it through the school of hard knocks, right? But then when you hit rock bottom, somebody needs to pick you up and, dust you off and send you on the right way again. And that's what I believe our loving Father, to use that analogy, does for us. He sends a new guide. He lights a candle in the darkness, and we can begin to see it and move towards it. The sun begins to rise above the horizon and a new dawn breaks, and we can then stretch our branches toward the light like a tree. All of creation illustrates this principle. And no, I don't think we're completely self-sufficient at all. I think everything about creation teaches us that, like I said, when we're born, but also this whole planet itself is a massive incubator.
Yeah, Joe, one of the things that our field of philosophy, I think, lacks is that there's a preoccupation with the individual and not so much on the network. And so when we look at the corpus of material that we've studied, it's a little bit more on the philosophy side of things, and Wade has more on the biblical side of things. But I look at it and I see a disproportionate amount of individual analysis of, like we'll call it downloading of information. Like, what does it mean for the individual experience of thought and thinking and being in the world, right? Now, that's fine, but what happens at the network level? Okay, and say, well, okay, let's try and stay away from computer language. One thing about religion is that it's very tribal, right? I mean, tribal just means your group. I'm not doing it in a pejorative way. I'm saying this is where it originates from. So you have small groups, and it's quite fascinating and beautiful, actually, because there's, we could say, I guess modern religions or Abrahamic religions, there's 2,400 years. Okay, so you look at that, 2,400 years. So how many versions of Father, Son, Father, Son, Father, Son, Father, Son, of continual wisdom being transferred down from generation to generation, experiencing a variety of things all over the world. It's tapping into that wisdom of knowledge of transfer from father to son, father to son, father to son. And this is not a male thing, actually. It's right. Because right beside every man, there's a woman. But it's so much not an individual. Like I can't presuppose that I can tap into a complete knowledge structure or the truth, which is probably, laden in ethics, without acknowledging that lineage of predisposition to your tribe and people outside of your family or your pair bond.
Well, and when you mention women, right, our mothers are typically the primary educators in the early years of life. And where would we be without that gentle, loving teaching.
Yeah. That's one of the things, we end up fighting off all sorts of things. Like if I use that comment now without prefacing, this includes women, and I'm using man in a general sense, right? It's alienating, because the females in the room think, oh well, it's I get this with Greek philosophy all the time. Oh, they're male chauvinistic. Actually, there's probably some of that was correct, but there's an entire tradition of pair bonding replication and wisdom that comes from the other, that is which holds creation itself. It's amazing. Not to diminish a female role, right? They help synthesize it.
Well, let's put a pin in it right there. Go quickly to another break, because we're chewing up the time here, because it's just so fascinating. I want to do another book trailer and offer a second book. And when we come back, we might share a couple of quotes from philosophers, both famous historical philosophers and some of those of you who are putting your comments in the chat. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this short promotion for a book that you will have the chance to win.
America's greatest literary treasures, Mark Twain, once said, "I apologize for such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." Get ready for a literary journey that's as rich and diverse as the flavors in a fine wine. Introducing 25 Servings of Soup, a literary tasting of established and rising talent. These stories aren't just enjoyable on the surface. Each one carries a special note. A subtle exploration of social issues, a celebration of diverse characters, and a spotlight on the challenges faced by those different from us. As you turn the pages, you'll find not just entertainment, but a profound invitation. An invitation to understand, respect, love, and empathize with others better. Dive into 25 Servings of Soup, literary journeys into life, meaning, and love. Because great stories are meant to be savored, shared, and remembered. Grab your copy today.
And there's a QR code if you want to point a device at that. Not the one you're watching this on, of course, if you're watching it on your phone. We don't want you to go anywhere. And we'll share in a minute the QR code for Joe's book. And finally, we'll share a QR code for how you can support this program and the other programs that have been launched by the Royal Falcon Foundation, which we talked a lot about last week. So here we are at that portion of the show where we're going to start introducing some of the audience's comments. There's still time to get your comments in there. And Joe will be awarding a copy of his book to the comment that he likes the best. And there is the QR code for his book. And Dan and I will be looking at other comments and awarding a copy of our sponsor, Something or Other Publishing's book, 25 Servings of Soup. So get your chats in the comment, and also remember to share this show, subscribe to it. We're very grateful to our audience. The show is growing, and we want that just to keep on going. So, Joe, right before we went to the break, it looked like you might have been wanting to say something else.
Yeah, and this should and could be like a 10-part discussion, right? Probably more than that. And I would also argue that I think, as I have earlier in this conversation, that the whole of philosophy and religion sort of orbits around this very question of what is truth, what is our access to truth, what does it mean, and what do we do with it if we're lucky and fortunate enough to possess it. Can you possess truth? Can you touch it? Can you even get near it? What I was going to ask, because again, I think it's just I think Dan's been on fire here today, as usual, but today especially. Like I was wondering, though, because you started talking about tribalism and how different tribes emerge, and I wonder, is every tribe's emergence its own brand of truth? Because if we have this a priori knowledge, and that there is truth there is a truth out there. If that is the case, and I don't think we've even honestly, I think we've sort of made that assumption without exploring it too much in this conversation. I'm not sure we have time to, explore whether or not, although it is the ultimate question, I think, is there such a thing as an objective truth? I think we make an assumption that there is. I'm not sure, but we haven't talked about it directly yet. But what Dan was kind of saying about this tribalism, and what he also mentioned before about a priori knowledge. So I'm wondering, is that tribalism, because that is all about, different cultures, different perspectives, that all comes from that lineage that you were talking about. Is that all derived from a brand and a perspective on truth, on tribes or an individual way of being's interactions with their truth? Is something more correct than something else so far as truth is concerned? And again, if you have this a priori knowledge about things, can you deviate from that? And what does that deviation look like? That was like 10 questions. But I hope you understand.
I was gonna say, do you want to take a crack at it, Wade? Because I think you have some good insights on that, and then I kind of have a couple highlight points I could.
Well, I'm not going to remotely try to answer any of that, but I'm going to share a couple of observations, right? One is I've had the blessing of having children, right? And so I can remember my own experience as a child, and it's something yet again to see that same experience by children in your own household that are your children. And I would say that children don't necessarily have an innate sense of truth, right? Not to throw my son under the bus, but his imagination and his flights of fancy allowed him to come up with the most unbelievable, improbable explanations for things from a very young age. I mean, he was the one that asked why 10 times more than my daughter. She asked why enough, but he 10 times more. And he would answer his own questions why. And it was amazing, the brilliance, the twisted brilliance of the answer that he would come up with. But what he had an innate sense of was a desire to get an answer that adequately described reality, to answer questions that were beyond his ability to answer. And yet he would try. Right. So the first thing that is just amazing is the desire to get an answer, the desire to pose the question, right? Versus just who cares? I mean, and a lot of that came from a sense of justice and what's right. I mean, he really wanted to get at truth, right? The second observation I always make is, what does the word truth even mean? And what language did Jesus say the word truth in? And does that concept in that language mean the same as the word truth in English? And Dan and Joe and Wade and everybody in the audience here understands something slightly different about what the word truth even means, right? So what are we even talking about? And then you get into defining terms, and then you get into some of the quotes we were reading from Kant and Nietzsche and so on in the studio beforehand. And the third observation I would make to what you are saying is that ultimately the truth as we know it is, we don't exist as we see ourselves. We are fields of energy. Somehow the two cells that created me, the sperm and the egg, and the DNA that combined somehow created this particular version of holding the energy into a specific form over time, so that I see myself and you guys see me, and I can slap myself on the face and I can feel pain, but I'm nothing but particles of energy, and most of me is empty space. And we know this scientifically, right? And so every one of those particles has a spin to it. If I'm not mistaken, the protons spin to the right and the electrons spin to the left, or rather orbit, and you know, quantum particles spin. Everything is spun, and we know what that word spin means in our modern society. Everything has a spin on it. Everything has some kind of orientation, which is kind of, to bring it back to my son and his quest to know the truth. He has a particular angle, a particular approach, a particular way of answering the questions for himself that led to those fantastical, amazingly complex explanations of reality that he was having at 2 and 3. He'd be like, oh, well, that means this and this and this. And I'm like, where did you get that from? Right? But he's trying to figure it out from his own perspective, through his own eyes. To your point about my truth or your truth, and the final observation is it our truth, or is it really just our baggage, right? Are we touting our baggage as truth? I'd like to speak from the perspective of my baggage, right? Because my experience is also my baggage, is it not? And that's just interesting to sort of not constantly emphasize the rightness of our views, which is another whole aspect of this. Sorry, those are all just observations, none of it answering anything.
Oh, I would disagree, but we'll let Dan talk.
Oh my goodness, he left me with the baggage. Well, that's because
share your baggage with us, Dan.
There you go.
The baggage. So this would represent something that is not true, that we kind of need your peers to help you through, I suppose, right? You know, I mean, and that's a level of trust, right? You know, it's like I have you guys show up for a presentation where I'm giving a speech to 100 people, and you're in the audience, and you're helping me a little bit, or afterwards you give me great honest feedback as a friend or something like that. Well, I mean, we have to grow with that honest feedback, right? So I think that's important, right? I mean, I think, Wade, we've even had that conversation on this show, maybe not on air, but it's like, you know, tell me what's going, like, what do you know, like, am I speaking too long? Am I going on a tirade? Am I doing this? Am I not engaged enough with the audience members? Am I not, like, this kind of feedback is important, right? Because we view the world through our own lens, but we also realize that we're also friends and husbands and business partners and stuff like that, right? So yeah, there's a lot of different shoes to fill. Yeah. I was going to say something too, Joe, about the tribal piece, and there's a really compelling piece of evidence in sociology studies that talks about tit for tat strategy. This is like retributive justice, eye for an eye. And in this moral arc, we understand that we're progressively, things are getting better. We could say revelatory. It doesn't matter. That's not the point I'm trying to focus on. But when they look at, from an evolutionary model, which tribes actually succeed, it's actually the tribes that are trustworthy. So it's not that you can't get ahead by being evil or take advantage or lie or manipulate or kill or any of that. It's just that if you're one of those kinds of tribes, they end up killing off each other. And so it's a very interesting thing that just like there's like computer models that actually show that is an evolutionary successful model for large scale societies, right? Or, you know, like humans are. And I think that's fascinating. I feel like that's empirical truth about, and it's very compatible with religion, right? That we do have this goodness to us at a tribal level, more goodness than bad, right? Goodness always wins. Wouldn't it be great to say that? Well, there's some evidence that is the case, right?
There's a beautiful quote from Gandhi that says, you know, I'm totally going to botch it and paraphrasing, that says that if you think about it and if you really look at it, goodness always does win out. Maybe not today, maybe not, you know, tomorrow. It might take 100 years, but eventually goodness prevails. But does goodness mean the truth? Is the truth always good? I'm not sure that you can say. Is there something that is the good also? Is there something that we can label good? There's a beautiful saying in Zen that says, I think I've even mentioned it on this show before, that says, beyond good and evil, there is a field. I will meet you there. Again, I might be paraphrasing that a little bit. But
Elysius or whatever. Yeah.
Is that what it is? Okay. So yeah.
Well, and it's that field of glory or bliss or something. Could be heaven, an earlier concept of heaven or something.
Sure. Yeah. But all to say that is even the things that we fundamentally believe in, good, bad, evil, right, wrong, do those really exist? Do those have their own ultimate correlation to this thing that we're ultimately saying exists, called truth with a capital T? Not what is true, like you delineated earlier, Dan, but what truth is. Do those things really actually exist in and of themselves, or are they also some sort of, kind of, to bring it back, like a tribal understanding of the nature in which the world operates?
So obviously we're going to have to continue this conversation. We're already over time, so I'm going to be the heavy here and put my, as the Germans say, my mustard on it, or as we might say, add my 2 cents here at the end, and just open up a new dimension. And that is that I was having a discussion recently about memories with somebody, and they were saying, well, do memories belong to the soul or are they of the body? And this person said, well, obviously they're of the soul. We take them with us into the next life. And I said, do we? Because there's a material component to where our memories are stored, and these concepts that we form, there's an emotional attachment. And I made a somewhat sexist comment, I guess, that, you know, women will remember 10 years ago what dress they wore to an event, because there's some kind of emotional attachment to that. And a man, I can't remember what I wore yesterday. So there's a different kind of interpretation that each of us individually, and perhaps some collective characteristics of certain identities, whatever, that are how we form our memories. But when we pass on into the next world, the next life, the next dimension, there are various views of that field that you talked about, beyond good and evil. My question was, well, do we take those memories, or will we take some kind of spiritual essence of those memories? Will we then understand what those experiences really were for the first time, right? In many holy writings, it talks about this passage into the next world. In the Baha'i writings, it says all our questions will be answered when we pass on into that next world. So maybe then we'll understand truly what truth is, and also reinterpret every experience that we had in this dimension, on this plane, in this life. I'm just going to sort of put a pin in it and not open that up to comment or response, because I do want to go now to some of our audience comments. And I'll just show quickly a few early on. Just want to make sure that we're honoring Jesus and who he was, as many people did in the comments. Because that was the topic, what is truth? And we were quoting his words and his crucifixion. So we had comments like that from Lord Cole, and the Word replying amen to him. And on the topic of, the pain and suffering from the desire of eating the forbidden fruit, from Heartfelt Son here. Yet, God knew it was going to be painful. Free will is a humdinger. So, those were some of the comments.
That's a great title for a book. Sorry. There's my stats right there.
There you go. Or a dissertation. How about that? How about a dissertation?
Humdinger, yeah. Hey, well, you can be my academic advisor. We'll see if we can sneak this by, right?
I would happily take on a student who wanted to name their dissertation "Free Will is a Humdinger." I would gladly. Anybody's interested, please contact me.
Here's another one from Ralph Shoemaker. regular guest and a frequent commenter. Thank you, Ralph. Quoting the Thomas Jefferson and the preamble, or was it was the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution? I think it was the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. There's some a priori knowledge that we should have been able to come to, but for some reason, this has been a problem and a challenge for our species throughout much of our human existence, even though, as Thomas Jefferson said, it should be self-evident. Here's another great comment from Freebird. I believe everyone believes in one way or another. No atheists in a foxhole, sort of thing. Your atheism goes out the window when you're that rabbit being chased by the fox yourself, is what's being said here. So, Dan and Joe, I'm sure you can see the comments. Are there any that you particularly want to call out, especially you, Joe, in terms of awarding your book to someone?
I kind of want to be the Oprah of my book right now and be like, you get a book and you get a book, and because I thought there were a lot of great ones.
Everyone here gets a book.
Right? Yeah.
Seriously,
time out. Maybe we should.
825 viewers.
Before we go there, let me share this QR code. Support our mission, right? Yeah. You too can make Joe's dream come true of everyone gets a book, right?
There you go.
No, but seriously, the Royal Falcon Foundation has received its determination letter from the IRS. So it is an official 501c3.
Nice, yay.
And on our website, we have the various levels of participation. Now, the primary focal point of this foundation is to sponsor these youth camps. But this show is also, through Something or Other Publishing and the Royal Falcon imprint, one of the beneficiaries from Royal Falcon Foundation. So go use this QR code, look at the various levels, participate, join us, contribute, and help us with the mission and vision of this show and the other projects, who are reaching primarily 11 to 15-year-olds, and beyond them, the whole ecosystem of families, villages, and tribes, opening people up to the experience of unity in diversity, where different views, different perspectives, true diversity of thought, diversity of temperament, diversity of perspectives versus just diversity of identity, right? Where those diversities are welcomed and encouraged. And in that environment, the younger siblings, the older siblings who are staffing it, and also the parents, the entire family and friends can become involved in the mission of Royal Falcon Foundation. So having said that, and walking us back from the prefaces of giving everybody a book, which we somehow need somebody to pay for, Joe, I appreciate the sentiment, but who, if you had to pick one or two.
Could I pick two?
Yeah, you can. Absolutely.
Okay, I would love to pick two, because I thought that Ralph Shoemaker's comments, well, he said something about me. Well, he threw in some Zoroastrianism there at the end, but he said something about me that I saw earlier that I was like, yeah, I kind of, he sounds like a unity between Hinduism and Islam. Sort of, kind of, there you go. And then I had Lord Cole, who just sounded like he just might be, he might connect with a philosophical war.
Well, absolutely. Even though, after all of his great comments, here's how he left it.
Well,
but no, he absolutely, and I agree with you. We just have to have a little fun with this.
Fair enough.
But for those of you, and by the way, since not everybody knows this, we stream on a bunch of different channels. So you're only seeing some of the comments depending on what channel you're on. Unfortunately, we get to see all of them in the studio from, all the different channels that we stream on. And there's a growing audience. I mean, we've got 1,100 live viewers right now, according to the stats. So thank you to everyone in our audience. Even though you're not all seeing each other and all your great comments, we are seeing all of them.
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to
on that determination letter. That's a big deal.
That's
thank
good.
you. Yeah,
congratulations.
We were rejected And I don't
It
want to
happens. Yeah.
criticize the IRS. It was really, some unnamed someone who had not properly filed everything that they required, but that certain unnamed somebody, i.e. me, took care of it eventually, and we eventually got it all. So this was Morning Gal, who made a comment too about mothers. Thank you very much. Said, I think we'll remember them, but I think they'll be so small in comparison with what we'll be surrounded by. So Morning Gal, you're my choice to get a copy of 25 Servings of Soup. Not quite as great as Joe's book, but we got to honor those authors as well. And so what you all need to do, if you've won, so Lord Cole, Ralph, you've won before. We have your number. We know where you live. We'll get that book out to you right away. Maybe even Lord Cole may have won a book previously. And we thank you, for being repeat show fans. And clearly you can win books multiple times from multiple guests. Morning Gal, I don't have any information on you. You'll need to send an email to info@soupllc.com to provide us with the address to send your book. And I do have to say, we reserve the right to not ship books internationally, because that shipping charge is multiple times the cost of the book itself. We can maybe talk about getting you an ebook, which doesn't involve that shipping charge. We are still a very small organization that doesn't have unlimited funds, but we are growing and we hope to do a whole lot more of this stuff. Any other comments that either of you want to share out with the audience?
I'm good. I think that's we're going to wrap up the show, I guess, right? I mean, you did such a good job there, Wade.
Well, we always wrap up the show by telling about next week's show. And boy, do we have a doozy for you. So a humdinger almost.
Well done.
So I just have to find the show link here so I can do it justice. But while I'm digging for it, and you would be amazed at how many tabs I have open that I'm searching through right now. But I found it. So the show next week, same time, same place, will feature an amazing individual who is schizophrenic, and that his birth name was Nimrod. And for those of you who know biblically what that means, that's not necessarily a good thing. And there's a history behind it. So at a certain point in his life, let's just say on the 8th day of his life, he had to be given another name, which was the name of, I think, his paternal grandfather, maybe it was, and he got the name Avraham. So he's Nimrod Avraham. He's from Israel, and he is the creator of God's Gang. God's Gang is an animated series featuring interfaith superheroes. And that's just the ice cube on the tip of the iceberg of this man's story. So do not miss next week's show with Nimrod Avraham, the creator of God's Gang, right here on this channel or any of the channels that you're watching. 8 o'clock Central, same place, same time for Created in the Image of God, the role of religion in society. Dan, Joe, last chance to give an answer to what is truth, or punt on it, or give some other pithy comment.
Well, I'm all about pithy comments. I think I would say that the truth is something that is real, that is verifiable. But then I would punt to say, how do you know what is real and what is verifiable and objective?
I'll just leave it with the comment that Jesus Christ is truth to millions of people. You can feel it.
So, Lord, thank you. Thank you, Dan and Joe. I just gotta, because I'm seeing Lord call, hey, we'll store up your books and ship them together, right? Because you're in Canada. So go ahead and send us your address again. We'll make sure, because you're a repeat winner, how can we deny you this benefit? So do write back to us. We'll make sure you get those books. And thank you so much, everyone. May God be with you. May you see the path for yourself with your own eyes and follow the truth, whatever the truth is, wherever it leads you, by God's grace. And we look forward to seeing you all again here next week, same time, same place. Until then,